Hello, everyone. My name is Sharnice Peters, and I am the Program Analyst for the Energy Policy and Evaluation Branch of the Office of Community Services, Division of Energy Assistance. On behalf of OCS, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar providing training for the fiscal year 2020 Performance Data Form Module 2, the Performance Measures. Today's webinar will be presented by Melissa Torgerson of Verve Associates and Dan Bausch from Apprise. Today's webinar is the second webinar on completing the FY 2020 performance measures. The first webinar, held earlier this month, provided brief reminders and key points. Today's webinar will furnish a more detailed review. First, the webinar will provide a detailed overview and line-by-line review of the requirements. Second, the webinar will give you guidance related to the impacts of CARES Act funds and the pandemic for your performance measures report. Third, the presenters will share some reminders to avoid common issues. The audience for today's webinar is LIHEAP state coordinators and support staff who are less familiar with the performance measures or want an in-depth review of the requirements in FY 2020 form changes. We appreciate your time today. We hope this is helpful as you prepare to complete your report. And with that, I'll turn this over to Ms. Melissa.
Thank you, Ms. Sharnice. I hope everyone's having a good day so far. Today's webinar is going to be 90 minutes, and we will take breaks occasionally to ask questions and answer questions. There are slides and other resources available for you now to download under the handout section in the GoToWebinar sidebar. This webinar is being recorded and will be published on the ACF YouTube channel. If you have a question during the webinar, you're encouraged to ask them as we go along. We encourage you to type them into the GoToWebinar question box. Submitted questions will be reviewed and responded to at the end of the webinar or during our section breaks. And if we don't have time to answer your question or it's very specific to your state, we'll send you a direct email with addressing your question. So I'm not going to go over this slide, but it is a lengthy slide deck and a lengthy webinar. And so this slide is kind of a great reference if there are specific areas that you decide you want to go back and look at or review a little bit more. This gives you a nice little index of the slide deck and key concepts throughout. Next slide. So today we're going to be talking about the performance measure module of the performance data form. This is the performance data form, for those of you who might not be as familiar, is actually one big report consisting of 3 modules. The first is the grantee survey. This is a mandatory report. The second is performance measures, and that's what we're going to be focused on today. That is also a mandatory report. Module 3 are optional performance measures, and these are performance measures that your peers and the work group and OCS decided might be meaningful for some of you and helpful, but they are not required at the federal level. So just to give you a little bit of a background, the performance measures have been submitted by state grantees since 2016 in Module 2 of the LIHEAP performance data form. Each year, they give grantees and OCS measurable information on annual LIHEAP impacts and targeting performance. There are really 3 main types of data that need to be reported, and of course we're going to talk about that throughout this webinar, but just an overview, we're looking at average annual income, benefits, and energy bill amounts for a sample of households. We're looking at occurrences where LIHEAP assistance restored lost energy service, or occurrences where LIHEAP assistance prevented loss of energy service. And these data in this module provide grantees with the information necessary to help with performance management, and that is evaluating and potentially updating your program and improving your program using data. So just to give you an example of some of the data that is available to you once you submit or put together this report, this is actually from the data warehouse, and we've put a link here and I believe at the end of the webinar so that you can actually go look up your own state. But this is an example of Montana, where we're looking at average annual energy burden after LIHEAP. And so after people receive LIHEAP in Montana, you can see that they're paying over time 6% and then only 5% of their annual income towards energy costs. So Montana can look at this and share with their network and stakeholders that over time they have reduced the percentage of income people are paying on their home energy bills. It's important to understand how this fits with other reports. And as I'll tell you, as a past coordinator, this was a real aha moment for me to understand how all of the reports fit together in a very straightforward way. The model plan, the state plan that you submit in the fall each year, is telling OCS and the whole free world what you plan to do with your LIHEAP funds. So this is what our plan is for the year, our roadmap, so to speak. After that year is done, you're going to submit these 3 reports. The household report looks at a basic overview of your outputs. So we said we were going to serve households in these ways, and now we're going to report what households we served, how many we served, and the characteristics of those households in each of our LIHEAP components. The grantee survey, which is module 1 of the performance data form, is about the money. So household report looks at the people. The grantee survey looks at your outputs in regards to money. Did you spend money on the things you said you would spend money on in your state plan? And how much did you obligate towards each component, as you mentioned in your state plan? What were average benefits? And what were the income eligibility criteria that you used? Module 2 of the performance data form, which once again we're talking about today, begins to look at outcomes. So instead of just counting dollars and counting people, we're now looking at how those dollars impacted the people, changed the characteristics or behaviors or attitudes or knowledge of the people that you served. And in this case, we're looking at energy burden reduction impacts. So how are you changing the amount of money they're spending, the proportion of money they're spending on energy bills? Are you targeting benefits to higher burden households? Are the dollars that you're spending restoring home energy to people who may have lost it, or preventing the loss of home energy to begin with? And now I believe Dan will talk about status and due date.
Thanks, Melissa. Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending today. Hope you're staying safe and doing well. We wanted to give you an update on the status of the performance data forum. As I mentioned on prior webinars, in response to the issuance of the LIHEAP CARES Act funds, OCS is working to implement changes to Module 1, which is the grantee survey, in order to ask you for information about how you have used those CARES Act funds. They're currently working on making those changes in the OLDC system. They are also working to issue an action transmittal that's expected to come soon, and that action transmittal will tell you about the changes to Module 1, and it will give you the revised due date for submitting the 2020 performance data form. That new due date is expected to be in late March. Now, as the due date is changing, we still want to encourage you to prepare your FY20 performance reports now so that they'll be ready for submission once the form is available in OLDC. As I mentioned, Module 1 will be undergoing changes. That may take you some time to just be able to report the CARES information. So we're encouraging you to still go forward with requesting the data from your vendors, the energy bill data, and working on your report. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about how the LIHEAP CARES Act funds may impact your report, as well as how the pandemic and any changes you made to your program to serve households in response to the pandemic may impact your performance measures for FY 2020. So the first thing we want to make very clear and to reiterate is that there are no changes being made to Module 2, to the performance measures. So the form is going to look the same as it looked last year and in prior years. There are no new lines, and the basic reporting requirements remain the same as they were last year for the FY 2019 report. Even though the action transmittal hasn't yet been issued, you can still find the prior FY19 instructions that provide guidance on how to complete the performance measures. There's a link here, and you can find it on the action transmittals page on the LIHEAP ACF website. We do encourage you to look at your information from last year and to use any resources you have from last year as you go about the process of preparing your report. So while there's no changes to the FY20 form, it looks the same, it's asking for the same requirements. If you have started, if you did start using your CARES benefits during fiscal year 2020 and you provided benefits to households using those funds, you do want to include those households and those funds when you're preparing information for the performance measures report. They should not be excluded. They're not put into a separate report. They're put together with all the other households you served in FY20 as you prepare your report. As it says in the middle of this slide, this report's intended for you to report on any households that received federal LIHEAP assistance during FY20, and that includes your regular LIHEAP funds, your LIHEAP CARES funds, or both. You would not include any supplemental state funds that you may operate out of your office. You also want to include the CARES benefits when you're calculating the total benefit amounts in Section 5 of your report, and we're going to talk more about that in later slides. So if you did start using CARES funds during 2020 and you've issued benefits, you may see differences in your performance measure results this year than in prior years. And there's 3 examples that are on this slide. The first is some of you may have used your LIHEAP CARES Act funds to provide an extra benefit to many of your households, So this is a supplemental benefit given on top of your normal benefit amounts that are derived from your benefit matrix. If that's the case, you should expect that the average benefit amounts in this year's performance measures report will be higher than in your FY19 performance measures. A second example is you might have used your LIHEAP CARES Act funds to issue new benefits or to target additional households, particularly in crisis situations that are being impacted by the pandemic. And you may see a larger number of restoration or prevention occurrences if that's the case. Finally, a third example is you might have used your CARES funds to serve more households than you normally would. And so your LIHEAP population that received assistance may differ in characteristics, important characteristics included in the report, such as average income amount or average energy bill amounts than in prior years. So you can have any combination of these kinds of impacts, but it's important to think about how you've used your CARES funds and to anticipate what you may see. If you have not used any of your CARES funds during fiscal year 2020, this is still important because you'll be using those funds this year during FY 2021, And so these same examples will apply when you do next year's report. Similarly, as you all know, it has not been a typical time period during FY20, and so you may see changes in your results related to the pandemic and the economic impacts of the pandemic. One example is throughout the country, many states had utility shutoff moratoriums that were in place or may still be in place. So you may see changes in the number of occurrences where lost service was restored, which is in Section 6 of Module 2. If you expanded or changed your eligibility requirements as a result of COVID, you may again see changes in the characteristics of your LIHEAP population. For example, the income level may have increased compared to last year. And you can also see other differences in characteristics because of coronavirus and how it's impacted households. So these are things to just keep in mind when you receive your first report from your IT staff or from your contractor and you look at it, to understand if you see large differences that they may in fact not be in error, and to try to weigh them against what you know about how things changed during FY 2020. Now we're going to look at some of the main reporting rules for the performance measures. Okay, so the first reporting rule we want to remind you of is that you need to collect households' main heating fuel bill and their electricity bill information from a sample of your energy vendors. And this slide lays out in 3 steps what you're required to do for Section 5 of the report. First is you need to identify your top energy vendors for each fuel based on the number of LIHEAP households or the percent of households served. Step 2 is that you then send information to those vendors and you request back your LIHEAP households' annual bill amount for that vendor. There's a great supplement that's available on the LIHEAP Performance Management website that talks about how to select your top vendors if you're not sure about how to do that, and the link is here. Once you receive data back from your sample of vendors, you use that and link it back to your other LIHEAP information on households' income, on households' main heating fuel, for example, and you'll use the data for households with that annual energy bill data. You'll use those households to calculate all the statistics that are in Section 5. And we're going to look through Section 5 line by line shortly. So to be able to do these 3 steps at the bottom of this slide, you need to have a few pieces of information for your LIHEAP bill payment household recipients. The first is you need to know a household's main heating type so that you can be able to include them in the right area of the report. Second, you'll need to know their vendor name and account number for their main heating type. So if they use gas to provide heating to their home, you'll need to collect their gas utility company name and account number. Similarly, you'll need to also collect their electricity vendor name and account number. So it's those 3 pieces of information that are needed to be able to then request information for a household as part of this process. Second reporting rule is calculating the statistics in Section 5. So Section 5 is asking for average statistics for 2 groups. There's a series of statistics that you'll need to report. One group is all your households with the collected annual energy bill data. The second group is a subset of that first group. That's the top 25% or the top quartile of households that have the highest energy burden, where you calculate the energy burden. If a household is missing a piece of information that needs to be reported in Section 5, it should be excluded from the statistics. So all the statistics in Part B are calculated with that green circle population. Then all the statistics in Part C of Section 5 are calculated using the households in the purple circle. Third reporting rule is to remember to include the CARES benefits and households if you issued benefits using your CARES funds during fiscal year 2020. If you, for example, if you provided a supplemental benefit to your households in the amount of $200, that $200 supplemental benefit should be included when you're calculating the average annual LIHEAP benefit amount. So if your average amount you give to households is $400 based on your benefit matrix, you issued a supplemental benefit of $200, then your average benefit amount in the performance data form is going to be 400 plus 200 equals $600, higher than it was last year because of the additional amount of funds that households received. Same thing if you served extra households with CARES, you want to make sure that those are included when you're sending your request to your vendors for energy bill data and when you're producing the statistics. Okay, and then the final overarching reminder reporting rule we had for you was reporting on your restorations and preventions. These are at the bottom of Module 2. And this is where you're reporting on occurrences where LIHEAP resulted in a change of status in energy service or prevented the loss of energy service. So there's 3 reminders we wanted to emphasize for you. The first is that these sections are focused on occurrences, not households. If you're a grantee who provides households with multiple benefits during a fiscal year, it's possible you may have multiple instances where a household received assistance that prevented them from losing their energy service or even restored lost energy service. So you'd want to count all of those instances rather than households. Second reminder is that these sections are asking you to look for any instances that meet the conditions described in the instructions. So this is not just limited to the household you collected energy bill data for, and it's also not just limited to your crisis assistance households. If you provide benefits using your regular assistance types, heating or cooling, that may have prevented a home from losing lost energy service after they received a notice that they were going to be disconnected, or if your regular assistance could have restored a household that was disconnected or out of fuel, then you'd want to count that in your statistics in sections 6 and 7. And so for those sections, you need 3 pieces of information that are at the bottom of this slide. You need to have data that either comes from your application or from your vendors on households' home energy status at the time that they applied or at the time they were assisted. So that could be questions on your application asking if they have a disconnect notice or if they're out of fuel or if they have less than a certain amount of fuel left. Second, you'll want to have an assurance that the LIHEAP benefit that you provided to the household did restore their service or prevent the loss of service, that it was a sufficient amount to do that. And then third, you need to have data on where the fuel source where the LIHEAP benefit was paid to be able to correctly report households in the report. Now we're going to pause and we're going to do a poll question, and this is to help to see if we're communicating effectively. And so Jorge's going to run this poll question for you. If you could please participate. Question is, if a household got a regular heating benefit and a supplemental benefit during fiscal year 2020, what do you do for section 5? And there's 4 options. There's you use the regular benefit only, don't include the supplemental. Option 2, use the total combined benefit amount, regular plus supplement. Third option is use both, but count the benefits and household separately. And the last option is I'm not sure. And these are anonymous, so please answer using your best judgment. Okay, we'll give it a couple more seconds. Okay, Jorge, I think we can go ahead. Okay, this is helpful to see. So the second option in green is correct, that 69% people if indicated. If you issued a supplemental benefit, you would want to combine that so a household would have one record that has its total benefit amount, including all benefits you issued during the fiscal year. You'd not want to keep them separately and count the household twice. You just want to count each household once. And we'll get into this more in the later slides. Now we're going to move on to section 5, which is energy burden targeting, and go line by line through it.
Okay, so some of the concepts you hear today are going to be repeated several times. We know that this is effective, and the way that Dan and I present things are different. So hopefully between the two of us, you'll hear what you need to hear. This is just an overview of what we're going to be walking through and what the form looks like. It's intimidating, but just keep in mind that the gray sections are auto-calculated. So really, we're just focusing on those sections that are the white cells. So this is a key concept cheat sheet. So if I was talking to someone who was doing this for the first time, or if I was explaining the results, these are things that are really important to understand. Energy burden, which we'll talk about more in a second, is the percentage or portion of annual household income that's spent on annual home energy costs. Bill payment assisted households, these are households that were provided with a LIHEAP benefit that were used to pay a share of household energy bills or utility deposits. So the difference between bill payment assistance and any LIHEAP assistance is that any LIHEAP would include things like weatherization or equipment repair and replacement. These are just households who received help with their bill. High burden households are the top 25% of those households with the highest energy burden of all the bill payment assisted households with available data. And that sentence is a mouthful and confusing, and we're going to explain it here in a few minutes. And then the annual total residential energy bill, and this is really important. This is a dollar amount that a household spent on home energy costs in a year, and it includes both the main heating bill and the annual electricity bill. And once again, we'll be going into that in more detail. We talk a lot about energy burden targeting. And so some things that will come out of this data and help us understand our program a little better are first a change in energy burden. So when a person comes in, we know or we'll be able to tell what percentage of their income they were paying towards energy bills. And then we'll be able to see that same number after they've received LIHEAP. And so we'll be able to see a before and after, and we'll be able to vary that by main heating fuel type. We'll be able to see whether high burden households are receiving LIHEAP benefits that are more or less or about the same as all households. And similarly, we'll be seeing if high burden households have a greater, equal, or lesser share of their energy bill paid than all households. And these are important, as you'll see on the next slide, because they're related to the statute. Because the statute tells us explicitly that we are to assist households, particularly those with the lowest incomes that pay a high proportion of household income for home energy, which once again is energy burden. And Assurance 5 tells us explicitly that we need to make sure that the highest level of assistance is being furnished to those households with the highest energy burden, or the lowest incomes and the highest energy costs or needs in relation to income. So as we talk today in about section 5, we're going to be talking about 3 main groups. So line A, which just starts at the top of the form, are all of your bill payment assisted households. This number, or the sum of these households, should match what you reported in your household report for the number of bill payment assisted households. In the next section, we're going to, out of all those bill payment assisted households, take those households that have available bill data, and that's going to be main heating and electric data, 12 months of it. And so you're going to see a pretty, in some cases, a big drop, but you're going to see a drop in households between line A and or section A and section B, and that's normal because we know that not all households have 12 months of data, or perhaps you're not collecting it for their particular vendor, but we expect to see a drop between A and B. And then we expect to see in section C that only 25% of the households that are in section B are reported. So with each section that you move down in section 5, or each piece that you move down, you're going to lose some households because we're taking subsets. And so this picture is a really nice example. Households in group B are a subset of the households in group A, and households in group C are a subset of the households in group B. And the purpose is to compare results for all households with data versus the highest burden households with data. And that's where we get our targeting numbers. So once again, this is a great slide. If you're ever talking about why you need to collect data with your utilities or your sub-grantees, or you're sharing the data that you've already collected, this is a great graphic for them to understand what energy burden is. It's the percentage of annual household income spent on home energy bill costs, and this is the equation for all the math nerds that like to see it written out. It can vary greatly for LIHEAP households depending on income and energy bills. And so we'll be going through, or there are some examples at the end of the slide deck on slide 78 if you want to take a look at that after the webinar. And now we'll talk about part A, all LIHEAP bill payment assisted households.
Okay, so as Melissa said, there's 3 parts, part A, part B, part C. The main focus is really parts B and C, because that's what you're asked to produce statistics on using those samples. Part A is where you report the total number of households, basically the total population that received a benefit to help pay one of their energy bills. So LIHEAP bill payment assistance is a term that is used for the household report as well as the performance measures. When you are counting households to report in Part A, you want to count any household that was provided with a LIHEAP benefit used to pay a share of their energy bills or utility deposits. So that's your regular assistance types, such as heating and cooling, crisis assistance to help pay a share of an energy bill. It would also include any heat and rent payments you have. It would not include households that only received weatherization or energy equipment repair or replacement services. It also would not include households that receive the nominal benefit as part of a SNAP partnership if you have heat and eat or heat and cool. So because bill payment includes any LIHEAP benefit used to pay a share of energy bills, that means if you did use CARES funds during FY20 to help households with their energy bills, then you would want to include them in this count. So this shows you a picture of what this looks like on the form. Part A is one line asking you for an unduplicated number of households that receive bill payment assistance. And throughout Section 5, you're asked to report statistics separately for each main heating fuel, electricity, natural gas, fuel oil, propane, or other fuels. And you're also asked to report statistics on all households, which is across all of these fuel types. Now, you may have a situation where you have households where you are not sure of their main heating fuel type. And in that case, we would ask you to put that in the other fuels column on the right-hand side and to indicate the count of households in the notes where the fuel type is unknown. The big takeaway here with Part A is that red box, all households, that's a number that should also be reported in your household report. And you're asked in your performance measures to break that number down by main heating type. So the yellow amounts add up to the red amount. So when you're looking at your report, you should cross-check it against your household report bill payment assistance number. Now we're going to go into the next part, Part B, which is the households that you've collected energy bill data for. Okay, so here's that picture again. Now we're moving down to the sample that you collect full energy bill data for. So this slide is great because it tells you the 5 pieces of information you need for a household to include that in Part B. You need to know that household's main heating fuel type. You need to have their annual income. You need to have the total amount in bill payment benefits that they received during the fiscal year. And then you need 2 pieces of information. You need their annual main heating fuel bill if they use a heating source that isn't electricity. And you need their annual electricity bill if electricity is not their main heating source. It's those 5 pieces of information that you'll be producing statistics on. So if a household is missing any of those 5, you wouldn't include it in Section 5. And that's the drop-off Melissa talked about from Part A down to Part B. So number 1 and number 2, main heating fuel type and the income, generally come from your client application or your intake records. The annual amount in benefits comes from your program records. But items 4 and 5 are generally collected from your energy vendors. Okay, so looking down at line 1 in Part B, you're going to report the number of households that you collected the energy bill data, and you have those 5 pieces of information. You're going to report it for each main heating fuel type, and then it's going to produce the total amount in the left-hand all households column. And that'll be auto-calculated for you for this particular line. Okay, line 2 is average annual household income. For all of these statistics, for line 2, 3, 4, and 5, you're producing means or averages where you take all the households that are included in Part B. You sum them up and divide them by the number of households and provide the average amount in these cells. So there's a few steps to remember when you're looking at the income amounts that you're reporting. The first is that you want to be including all of those households that are in Part B. You may have households that have very low income levels or zero income. They should still be included, and you should include zero income as part of that calculation of the average income amount. The instructions ask you to report on the gross household income amount. And then thirdly, you want to make sure to check that you have provided annual income amounts. You may collect income that is monthly income or quarterly income. And if you see anything unusual in your average statistics, you might want to check that all the households you use had their monthly income converted to annual income or their quarterly income converted to annual income. Line 3 is the average annual total LIHEAP benefit per household. So all the statistics here are at the household level. So you want to have one record per household. So when we're thinking about benefits, the steps to remember are that you want to include all your households that received that are included in Part B. And so if a household received a regular benefit and then received a crisis benefit to help pay their energy bills, you don't want to have that household counted twice. You want to add those benefit amounts together and have that household included once when you're calculating the averages. And if you have any questions about that, you can reach out to us and we can help you with that process. You also want to make sure you're not including benefit amounts for weatherization or equipment repair, which are generally higher amounts that can be in the thousands. We're just talking about the bill payment assistance benefits a household received. Line 4 is the average annual main heating fuel bill. This is one of the pieces of information that you'll collect from your energy vendors that you have selected. A few steps to remember when you're looking at your annual main heating fuel bill information. The first is remembering you're getting this from a sample of energy vendors, and they may provide the data in different formats. There may be differences between the spreadsheets or the data sets you receive from your vendors. So you're going to want to look at it carefully and make sure you have an approach in place to combine those and to link those back to your LIHEAP client data. You want to make sure that you've communicated to your vendors to include all required customer payments. So that would be not just their usage charges, but also their monthly service charges that they're asked to pay, taxes that they're asked to pay. Your vendors should exclude any optional charges, such as equipment service plans, furnace plans, and things like that. And then this last bullet is important. For your electricity main heat households, your electricity bill is the main heating fuel bill. There's only one energy bill that the client will have in that case. So to help the report produce accurate statistics, instead of reporting their annual amount in line 5, which we're going to talk about next, you'll report it here as their main heating fuel bill, since there's only one bill and most of it will be used for electric. Most of their electric bill will be used for heating. So we're asking that you report it on this line because that helps to make sure that the calculation for all households is accurate. Okay, the last line that you'll need to fill in Section 5, Part B, is the average annual electricity bill. Very similar to line 4 when you're looking at your data to report the average annual electricity bill. Remember, this comes from the electricity vendors. They should be including all the monthly charges that a customer will incur related to usage or fixed fees. They would not include any equipment service plans, such as plans for the utility to check their AC equipment. And if you have electricity main heat households, in their column of the report, you'll put $0 here because their full amount will already be included in line 4. So that avoids making sure they're double counted. So as I mentioned, in Section 5, you have to report information for each of the main heating type categories. You also have to report information for all households. That's putting all the households from Part B together and calculating the statistics for them together. In the report, you may want to approach it by looking at each of the fuel types and calculating an average across those 5 columns. But that would not be correct because the number of households with each fuel type will be different. So you may have many more households that are electric main heat compared to natural gas heat. So there are 2 options to help you to be able to report the correct statistics for this column. One is in the handouts. There's a Excel spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet has the calculations to calculate the all households fields once you enter your average values for each main heating type. So you can download that and use that or provide it to the right staff. The second option is to calculate the averages directly in your data system using all the households that are included in Part B. Okay, now we're going to go on to Part C, which is the high burden households, before we take a question break. Okay, so for Part C, now we're going down to the smallest circle, the purple circle. We're going to be looking at a subset of households from Part B and producing all the same statistics I just reviewed, but only for that subset or subgroup of Part B. So this is the cheat sheet for high burden households. When you think of high burden households, you may have a definition in your state for what qualifies as a high burden household, or you may have a target to reduce households' burden. But for the performance data form, high burden is defined as the top 25% or the top quartile of households from Part B that have the highest calculated energy burden. We're going to show how you can calculate that and identify those households. Second term that Melissa went over on the first cheat sheet was residential energy bill. This is the total dollar amount that a household spent on energy costs in 1 year. So this is line 4 plus line 5 gives you a household's total residential energy bill. So how do you identify the households that are taken out from or are identified from Part B and then used to produce all the statistics in Part C? Well, there's a 5-step process, and these slides lay out that process. The first is, I want you to look at the table on this slide. We have 5 households, household 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They have varying main heating fuel types, and you can see their annual main heating fuel bill, their annual electricity bill, and then the sum of those, which is their annual total residential energy bill. So household 1 was paying $2,800 was their main heating bill, and their annual electricity bill was $1,200. You add those together, their total residential energy bill they're paying for their home is $4,000. So the first step is just adding those 2 amounts together. If you look down at household 3, which is an electricity main heat household, that household only has 1 bill, their electricity bill. So that household's bill, which is $1,200, is included in the main heating column, and you would want to put 0 for the annual electricity bill. So their total residential energy bill is $1,200, which is correct. It's not double counting it. So step 2 is, once you've calculated the total residential energy bill, you'll want to calculate each household's energy burden using the formula that's shown on this slide. You take that energy bill amount, divide it by their income, and multiply by 100 to get their energy burden percent. For households that have 0 income, or their annual bill is actually greater than their household income, you want to assign a value of 100% for their energy burden. Step 4 is once you've done all these steps and you have each household's energy burden amount, you want to sort the data set from highest to lowest using that calculated energy burden. Then the final step is you can draw the top 25% of households with the highest energy burden. And when you do that, it's important that you're looking at all the households in Part B, and you're not doing this separately for each fuel type. It's the top 25% across all. So you may find that households in Part C, a large portion of them may be one fuel type compared to in Part B because they're the high burden households with the highest energy burdens are more commonly one fuel type than another. So this slide shows all of these 5 steps together. So this is a condensed version to help you. So step 1, you're adding the amounts and getting their residential energy bill. Step 2, you're calculating the energy burden. If you look at household 5 in the top row, you can see that household is 0 income, so their energy burden has been coded as 100%. You can see they're sorted based on their energy burden value from greatest to least. And then the top 25% are selected and are shown in green. Those would be the households you would include when you're producing the statistics for Part C. For Part C, the instructions are the same as Part B. So when you're calculating the statistics, you would follow all the same steps that I reviewed for Part B. The only difference, again, is that you're doing these for the subset of households that you've identified as high burden. Now we're going to look at Part D and Part E, which are the targeting indexes for high burden households.
So the good news is that sections D and E are auto-calculated, so you don't have to do any math for the pieces that I'm going to talk about here, and it's using the information in B and C that Dan just went over. Section D is a benefit targeting index for high burden households. This tells you how LIHEAP benefits are targeted to high burden households compared to all households. So whether you're giving them higher benefits or lower benefits or the same benefits. Section E is the burden reduction targeting index for high burden households, and this tells you whether or not you're paying the same share of the energy bill or more of the energy bill or less of the energy bill compared to the average household receiving LIHEAP. And once again, at the end of the slide deck, there are some additional slides that you can look at for more information.
Okay, we're going to pause and take some questions before we move into the restoration and prevention sections. If you have a question, you can enter it in the question box throughout the webinar, and Jorge compiles them, and we will have questions now, and then we'll also have questions later in the webinar. Any questions, Jorge?
Not yet, but maybe people are typing, so let's give it another few seconds.
Okay. I want to also remind you that in the handouts we have, in addition to the spreadsheet I mentioned, we have a check before you submit document that has some steps you can take when you're looking at your report to confirm the information before you submit it. And we also have a copy of the slides from the last webinar that was held earlier this month. That was reminders for the performance measures.
Dan, so far we only have one question, which I'll read to you. When we have a household that has different income amounts because they received different benefits at different times, how should we count that in the report?
Yeah, that's a great question. You may have households that, based on how your program is structured, you may ask households to apply for each benefit that they receive, and you may have a household that received multiple benefits during fiscal year 2020, and their income amounts changed. The guidance for keeping their income amount for this report is to be consistent in your approach, and generally we advise to use the earlier income amount. And if you have any questions about that, or you have any concerns about it, reach out to us, and we'll talk through it to try to help you.
Thanks, Dan. We don't have any other questions right now, so I think we should move on to the next section, but I encourage everyone, if you have questions, just type them as you go, and I'll collect them and read them out to the presenters at the end of the webinar.
Okay, well, we'll move on to section 6, which is restoration of home energy service.
So section 6 talks about how LIHEAP helps people who have lost their energy service and restores it after they've lost it. And so it requires specific information on the number of occurrences, which you can see underlined bolded. LIHEAP assistance led to the restoration of a household's energy service during the federal fiscal year. And so this includes energy service that was restored after a household had already been disconnected from a utility, having fuel delivered to a home that ran out of fuel, or repair and replacement of inoperable home energy equipment. It's really important to note that this is not an unduplicated count of households. A household might have had energy service restored more than once in a year, and each occurrence should be counted and reported. I also want to note here that it's not just even about more than once a year. Part of the reason that occurrences were put in there instead of households is that many of you will have folks who come in with disconnected natural gas and electric, and so you might split the energy assistance payment to pay a portion of the payment towards each electric and natural gas. And in those cases, you'd want to count each occurrence, one under electric and one under natural gas, even if it's in the same visit. So once again, you're reporting on the number of occurrences during the year in which LIHEAP assistance led to the restoration of households' energy service after disconnection. So this is for utility, electric and natural gas service. You'll want to report on the fuel source where the LIHEAP benefit was applied. You'll notice in section 5, when we're talking about energy burden, that we're asking you to report households under their main heating fuel type, regardless of where the benefit was applied. In this case, in sections 6 and 7, we're asking you to pay attention to where the money went, and you're going to be reporting the household under the utility type where the benefit was given. Once again, households could have experienced multiple instances where LIHEAP assistance was used to restore service after disconnection. This could be multiple times throughout the year, or once again, it could be in the same visit even, and each occurrence should be counted. And for those of you who are dealing with electric prepay, you'll want to include those households whose account ran out of funds and who had their energy service restored with a LIHEAP benefit. And if this applies to you, you can leave a note to clarify that some of the households were prepay electric, and this is the criteria that you used. For delivered fuel or non-utility households, so here we're talking about oil, propane, or other types of fuel, you'll want to pay attention to the times where LIHEAP assistance resulted in the delivery of fuel after the household had already run out. Once again, you'll want to report based on the fuel source where the LIHEAP benefit was applied. So if you paid to have oil delivered after the tank ran out, or if they were out of propane and you LIHEAP paid for propane, uh, you will want to count it under propane and oil. Households who could have experienced multiple instances, once again, multiple times through the year or within the same visit. I want to underscore with this and the previous slide that we've gone to states and seen that some of them are just counting their crisis assistance household in Section 6 and in Section 7. And many of you, however, will use regular benefits to alleviate a crisis situation if you can. And so you want to be looking across both crisis and your regular benefits to see which households meet this criteria. Line 3, some of you have repair or replacement equipment repair and replacement programs, either as part of your crisis component or as part of your weatherization program. And so these are households that had inoperable heating or cooling equipment repaired or replaced using LIHEAP funds. Just as you do with bill payment assistance, you're going to report on the fuel source for the equipment that was repaired or replaced, even if it's not their main heating. Although usually it is, but in some cases it's not. Households could have experienced multiple instances in which LIHEAP assistance was used to restore or replace their inoperable energy equipment. This is pretty rare. If you're seeing a lot of this, you should probably take a look at your program, but you do want to count each occurrence in those situations where it happens. Red tagged energy equipment is considered inoperable, so you should be including repairs and replacements of red tagged energy equipment. Grantees, this gets at what I was saying earlier, grantees who have equipment repair and replacement programs, either as part of their crisis, some people actually have it as part of their regular components as well, should be counting it, as well as that work being done on the weatherization side, where weatherization funds are being used to replace inoperable equipment. This might require some coordination with your weatherization partners to obtain this data. And keep in mind that if you're getting it from weatherization partners, it's important that you're asking them not just to report all of their equipment repairs and replacements, but specifically those repairs or replacements where the equipment was inoperable or red tagged. And now we're going to move to Section 7, Prevention of Loss of Home Energy Service.
So Section of 7 is almost a mirror version of Section 6. Section 7 is focused on how your LIHEAP benefits stopped a household from losing home energy service and prevented that from happening. Just like Section 6, there's 3 items to report on in this section. The first is the number of instances where a household was assisted after they'd received a utility past due notice or a disconnect notice, and LIHEAP assistance prevented that household from being disconnected. The second is household with limited fuel at imminent risk of running out of fuel, and the LIHEAP benefit prevented that. And the third is instances where equipment was failing and LIHEAP assistance helped prevent that household from losing their home energy service because the equipment was repaired or replaced. One distinction with prevention from restoration is that grantees will need to define criteria for being at risk of losing energy service. That may be a certain criteria with the amount of fuel remaining, or a certain crisis criteria that you use to help you identify households that are at risk of losing energy service that you would then report in this section if a benefit was provided to them that prevented their loss of service. So line 1 is the past due notice or utility disconnect notice. This is where you look at those households that had a past due notice at the time of application. There are a few steps to remember here. One is that you're going to have to report based on the fuel type where the LIHEAP benefit was applied. So you'll need that information from your program records. A second is that you could again have households that experience this multiple times if you provide multiple benefits to households in the same fiscal year, and you'd want to include each occurrence. Because you're already counting in the restoration section in section 6, you're already counting occurrences where a household that was disconnected received assistance and was then reconnected, or a household that was out of fuel or without working equipment had that situation rectified. You don't want to again count those households in the prevention section. This is just looking at households that had energy service but were at imminent risk of losing it, and the LIHEAP benefit prevented that from happening. For your state, the prevention numbers and the restoration numbers may be very different depending on how your crisis program is structured and on your policies. If you're a state that provides, will only provide assistance after a house has been disconnected, for example, for crisis, you may have higher restoration numbers. If you target identifying households that have a past due notice or that are running out of fuel, then your prevention numbers may be higher. And again, with 2020 being an unusual year because of the coronavirus and utility moratoria, you may see big differences in this year's report compared to last year's. Now we're going to look at line 2, which is imminent risk of running out of fuel. This is where you're going to focus in on instances where a household had a low level of fuel based on a criteria that you have specified, and they received a LIHEAP benefit that provided them with fuel and prevented them from running out of fuel. Just as with line 1, you'll have to report it by fuel source, whether they were propane, fuel oil, or something else. And you'll want to include each occurrence. The last line is line 3, and that's the repair and replacement of home energy equipment that was operable. And this can be a little confusing, but the main thing I want to highlight for you is that in section 6 that Melissa went over, you're reporting in line 3 on households that had home energy equipment that was not working, was not operable. In section 7, you're reporting in line 3 on the households that still had working home energy equipment but was failing and had to be replaced or repaired in order to make it fully functional. Just as with the prior 2 lines, you'll want to report on the fuel source for the equipment. You'll want to exclude those repair and replacements of red tagged equipment. And you may need to coordinate with your partners who assist you with implementing this program component. So you may need to set up an approach with your weatherization partner to make sure you can identify instances where a household met this criteria so that you can report it. Okay, now we're going to move on to some final reminders before we take more questions.
So OCS is expected to issue an action transmittal soon with the revised due date for the FY 2020 performance data form. At this point, we're expecting it to be late March. There are no changes to Module 2, what we just went over for 2020 reporting. The performance measure data fields remain the same as those used in the 2019 form, and the reporting requirements also remain unchanged. The only difference is that you're going to be including CARES benefits and households as part of your Module 2 statistics. Even though it may not be due until March, grantees are encouraged to begin or to prepare their FY 2020 performance measures reports now. So especially since this involves getting data for many of you from vendors and merging that with your program data, it can be a lengthy process. And so we're encouraging you to get started and pull it together as soon as possible. The FY 2020 performance data form will be made available in OLDC once proposed changes to Module 1, the grantee survey, are finalized. We always remind people that there are multiple steps to putting your data into OLDC, including entering the data, saving, certifying, and submitting. So make sure you give yourself a lot of time to move through those steps. After you submit your report, Apprise will email grantees to alert them to any issues or questions based on reviewing their submitted data. So some of you who just recently completed the household report may be getting those types of emails about your household report. Grantees should provide a response and make any corrections to the submitted report. And once Apprise confirms that your report is accurate and complete, the liaison will accept it in OLDC. Your final approved report will be used for the LIHEAP report to Congress. If you later identify that a correction or change is needed, you can submit a revision in OLDC. Here are some OLDC resources. It's accessed through Grant Solutions, and you can log on at the website located here. Once you're logged in, you'll click OLDC in the top taskbar to get to the home page. If at any point you need assistance with your login or getting your report started, you can contact the Grant Center of Excellence help desk at the numbers here or email them at the email link. We've given lots of, we've hinted throughout the slide deck at all of the different resources that are out there to help you with this. The instructions, right now, the instructions aren't out for 2020 until the form's been updated and we get an updated AT, but because the Module 2 is not any different from last year, with the exception of including CARES funds, you can use the same instructions to complete your Module 2 from 2019. There's a check before you submit document. This is really handy either for you to use after you've completed or your IT staff have completed the report. You can also give it right to, if you have IT staff who are doing the report for you or an analyst, you can give them this document to check their work. Past year's performance measures data, this is especially important for some of you who are new and you get the report done and you want to make sure that it looks not drastically different from previous years, or you want some context. You can find all your previous year's data on the data warehouse. There's also the performance measures data collection guide documents. I would circle this with a red marker if I could, because it is a hugely valuable resource. It includes a main document that talks about all the different pieces of data you need to collect to complete this report accurately. It even walks you through the kinds of questions you should be putting on your client application and where you should be collecting pieces of information. It also includes a number of supplements that go into detail on certain aspects of your data collection. For example, Dan talked about imminent risk in in section 7, and that's defined by the grantee, but we get a lot of questions about how do other states define that? What are some things we need to think about? And there's a whole supplement on prevention and restoration measures that will help you dive into that. And finally, there's a ton of other performance management resources. So we don't just collect this data to collect data, and because we love reporting and we're all data geeks, we We collect it with the ultimate goal of being able to analyze it, interpret it, and improve our programs. And so there's a variety of performance management resources, not just to help you with the reporting aspect, but also understanding the data and using it to think about your program at the LIHEAP Virtual Library. The training webinars for Module 1, the Grantee Survey, will take place in February. Just as they have with these webinars, OCS will send emails to announce the dates and provide registration information. We have done a few webinars already this season, and recent webinar recordings are available on the LIHEAP training page, which you can see the link here. Some of you have been asking for that link, so it's here. If you need copies of any prior presentation slides, please contact Apprise and we'll get those to you. And there are lots of people to contact for help. Your OCS liaison link is here if you're not sure who that is, if you're new. We also have repeated the Grant Center of Excellent Systems Help Desk. This is the OLDC Help Desk with an email and phone number. And there's several members of the Apprise team who are willing to talk with you and walk you through pieces of this. And I always say this on every webinar, but it bears repeating. Even the littlest question can sometimes hold us up for hours and we're banging our heads against a wall. Please just call. We're happy to help you with your data, whether that's processing or collection or even analyzing. Don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. And now we'll take final questions.
Hi, this is Jorge. We do have a few questions here. So if that's okay, I'll just read it to the panelists. The first question is, should we start working on the grantee survey or should we wait until the new guidance is released?
Hi, this is Dan. So for the grantee survey, OCS should be issuing the action transmittal soon. That'll provide you with the new instructions. You will be asked to report a lot of the same information as in the past, but you'll also be asked to report information on how you use the CARES funds. So if you're able to start indicating how you have used your regular funds and how you've used your CARES funds, you can begin to work on that, but the specific requirements and what the form will look like, you'll need to wait until the action transmittal comes out. In terms of OLDC, you should not be able to access the form, so the form will not be available. If you try to go in and initiate the form using another year, that would not be correct. So at this time, you shouldn't do anything in OLDC until you hear that the form is available.
Thanks, Dan. We have another question. It's for sections 6 and 7, so the prevention and restoration sections. If the benefit was funded through the CARES Act, should it be counted in these sections?
Yes. So for all of Module 2, whether they were assisted with your regular LIHEAP funds or your CARES Act funds, you'd want to be including them. You don't have to report any separate information for CARES, but you want to look at any household that received assistance. And if it received assistance that restored lost service, you would count it in the restoration section. If it received assistance that prevented the loss of service, then you would count it in Section 7.
Good, thank you. We have one more question, and this question is about the targeting indices and how to interpret them.
Okay, that's a great question. Jorge, can you bring up the slides that talk about the targeting index? Okay, so this is a slide that shows you the benefit targeting index, there's two indexes in Section 5 that Melissa talked about, and they are both automatically calculated for you. But the point of Section 5 is that you're comparing information for all households with energy bill data to just the high burden households, the top 25%, and seeing how the benefit amounts they received compares and how their energy burden before and after LIHEAP was impacted and compares between the Part B group and the Part C group. So this slide showing you the first index, the benefit targeting index, and that's looking at whether those high burden households, that top 25%, receive higher benefit amounts as all households, the same benefit amounts, or lower average benefit amounts than all households. The score revolves around the number 100. If you have a benefit targeting index of 100, that means that your average benefit amount to those high burden households is equal or the same as the average benefit amount you provide to all households. If your index score is greater than 100, it means those high burden households who are paying a higher share of their income for their energy expenses, they're receiving a greater average benefit amount. If it's less than 100, it means their average benefit amount is less than all households. So if you have a score of 138, that means that there's 38% higher benefit amounts for the high burden households compared to all households. If you have a score of 95, that means that they're receiving 5% lower benefits than all households. If you go to the next slide, Jorge. So the second index is looking at energy burden reduction. In the performance measures, in Part B, it will show you and calculate for you the energy burden before and after LIHEAP on average for your households. And it will also do the same for the high burden households in Part C. The benefit reduction targeting index compares the change among those two groups and also produces a number for you. If your score is 100, that means the average share of the energy bill that's paid by the LIHEAP program for those high burden households is equal to what's paid for all households. If the score is less than 100, the average share of the energy bill paid by the LIHEAP program for high burden households is less than the share for all households. So their energy burden reduction share is lower than for all households. And if the score is greater than 100, then the average share of the energy bill paid by LIHEAP for high burden households is greater than the share paid for all households. Melissa, do you want to add anything on the targeting scores?
Two things. First of all, we've done some extensive training on this in the past, and I think we're going to be doing some more here in the near future. Are we going to include these slides with the? Can we include these with the slide deck when we post it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. And then I do think that it's hard on paper to understand the difference between benefit targeting and burden reduction. And I think the key here really is that you can be giving a person twice the benefits. A high energy burden household may get twice the number of benefits that an average household does, and you think you're doing great. But when you look at this burden reduction targeting, what you see is that when a person's energy burden is so much higher than the average household, even giving them twice the benefits may not have a very large effect. And so this really helps you kind of hone in on whether or not doubling a benefit makes sense, or whether you should be looking at targeting a little bit more carefully based on fuel type or other characteristics. And so we've talked about that in past trainings, and if you have questions or you want help analyzing your data, we're happy to do that. We also send out an executive summary each year. Many of you have received this in the past, that in one page kind of lays out how you're doing and interprets this data for you. You can go to your past executive summaries at the performance management website, which you have the link for in the presentation.
Right, and they'll show you more visually how to view these indexes and understand them. And another resource that might be helpful for you if you're wanting to understand the indexes better and what they mean is on the performance management website under Grantee resources. There's a data case studies page, and that page includes different case studies, including one on energy burden targeting, where the performance management implementation work group looked at Minnesota and their benefit determination procedures and how they were targeting households. So that might be a helpful resource for you as well. We have time for a few more questions, but Jorge, I think we should run the poll now as well. We like to do polls to make sure we understand if our training is working as intended. So if you could please answer this poll, it's how confident are you that you understand how to correctly complete the 2020 performance measures? And while you're doing that, Jorge, are there other questions?
Yes, one more question. What do we do if we don't have vendor data for all our CARES households?
That's a good question. So for your CARES household, for any of you on here that are still in the process of reaching out to your vendors, you do want to make sure that you're including households that received bill payment assistance from CARES if they also use that vendor to provide main heating or electricity. If you have some CARES households that perhaps applied, maybe you made a special application for a new assistance type and you don't have the vendor data for all the households, you would not be able to include them in Part B and Part C of Section 5 because you won't have their energy bill data, and you can just mention that in the notes, any notes like that. Okay, you want to show us the results of the poll, Jorge? Okay, looks like a good amount of people responded. If you're in the somewhat confident category, or maybe you were below that and didn't answer the poll or didn't feel comfortable answering the poll, if you have any questions, please reach out to us. We want to make sure that that everyone is very confident. I think that's probably it. Do we have any more questions, Jorge?
No more questions.
Okay. Well, we really appreciate your time, and we will be working with OCS to send out emails about the Module 1 Grantee Survey trainings for February. So thank you very much, and have a great day.